Okay, so in the last video we were talking about how a bank, they make money by loaning out money. They take the deposits from their customers, loan it out to other customers, and then they profit the difference in the interest rates between they pay the depositors and the interest rates that they charge the people, the loanees, the people who are obtaining those loans. We also talked about how if Bank A loans out $800,000, then the person that they loan it to goes out and buys a bunch of stuff, and then the people that they're buying it from deposit all of their money into Bank B, for example. Bank B will then take those deposits, loan it out to somebody else, and then the trend just keeps continuing. We call that the creation of deposits. And this is all possible because we're not really dealing with a physical currency, right? We're not dealing with cash or with coins or with a dollar bill or with a nickel. We're dealing with entries in a checking account. So because of that, we're actually creating more money. So let's kind of go through and let's look at a table here and kind of elaborate more on how this is actually happening. So we're going to use that same example where the Fed, we said that was incorrect. They're actually buying $1 million worth of government securities because they are buying that money. They're giving that money there since they are actually buying it. They're giving money to the citizens, to the customers who held the government securities. So for the government securities to go from the customers, from the citizens, they give it to the Fed, but in exchange the Fed gives the money back to the citizens. So then the citizens do what with it? Well, they go put that money in a bank. So $1 million, they actually buy $1 million worth of government securities. That $1 million is deposited into these individual banks. Remember that required reserve ratio was 20%, so the bank must keep 200,000 of that. So 800,000 is loaned out as new loans. So Bank A, they receive $1 million in deposits. They can loan out 800,000, must keep 200,000 in reserves. Bank B then, Bank B receives that 800,000 because, well, Bank A, or the person who loaned from Bank A, buys everything with it, so that money goes back into somebody else's hands. It gets deposited. So with this change in deposits, if Bank B receives this $800,000, they can loan out 640,000 of that, and they must keep 20% of this 800,000 on hand. So they must keep $160,000 in reserves. So now the person who borrowed from Bank B then takes and buys stuff with it, and the people that they buy it from, they go and deposit that money in Bank C. Bank C now has an additional deposits of $640,000. With that additional deposits, they can loan out $512,000, but they must keep $128,000 on hand. In each one of these scenarios, we see that they have a change in deposits. They must keep 20% of that change in deposits, and they can loan out the rest. And if they loan it out to somebody, gets that loan from Bank A, it gets deposited in Bank B, or several different banks. Bank B then takes that money and loans out more. By them loaning out more, it winds up getting deposited in Bank C, and so on and so forth. So that trend just keeps continuing. They keep loaning everything out. And as we see, as it goes down, it gets a smaller and smaller amount of change in deposits, and it keeps going. And what we wind up finding out is by the time it finally reaches the end of these banks finally stop loaning out all of that amount of money, we deposited $1 million. The Fed basically put $1 million back into the money supply. And because of all of these different loans, it generates $5 million in deposits. Out of that $5 million, $4 million is loaned out, and $1 million is kept in as required reserves. So $1 million enters into the money supply, and it generates $5 million. All because we are dealing with checkable entries. We're dealing with actual entries, not physical amount. So that's a really interesting thing to note, is that by putting in just $1 million, the Fed generates $5 million down here. And that's because of the aspect of, well, they're taking that amount, loaning it to somebody else, that somebody else deposits it in a different bank. The different bank loans it out to somebody else, and the trend just keeps going until there is no more to loan out. And the only reason there's no more to loan out is because the changes in reserves, or these reserve requirements, keeps reducing the amount that can be loaned out at each additional bank. But all of this relies on two main assumptions. The first main assumption is that the banks minimize our holdings in excess reserves. Basically, the banks are trying to loan out as much money as they can in order to make as much profit. Where you don't have Bank A, even though they have $1 million in deposits, they don't have to loan out $800,000. They could loan out $750,000. But they are trying to maximize or minimize their holdings in excess reserves, so they loan out the full amount. The second aspect is all proceeds from the loans are deposited back into the banking system. So what that means is we loan out this first $800,000. That $800,000 is used to buy everything, and the people borrowing the loans use all $800,000 to buy everything that they need, and they don't keep any of it. No cash is withheld. And as we go through it, all of these loans are spent in their maximum amount, and no cash is withheld. Basically, what we're saying is the people who are buying it aren't taking who are borrowing that money aren't taking that cash, sticking it into a cookie jar and burying it in the backyard. All of that cash, all of that money is redeposited back into the banking system. If those two assumptions hold, then $1 million will generate $5 million in deposits at a 20% required reserve ratio.